delegated.
Hello? It's on.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the October 12th Urban Design Committee. My name is Ophelia Cancio, and I am chair of this committee. The following guidelines are in place for meeting in the council chambers at City Hall. Only the south entrance to City Hall will be open for access to the building. For exiting the building, all accesses can be used. Air purifying machines have been installed in the chamber, and hand sanitizer machines and disposable face masks will be available. When called upon, applicants and speakers will come forward to the front podium to speak. Only one person at a time should come to the podium. Please speak into the microphone, identify yourself, and provide your address for the record when you begin speaking. Address your comments to the committee. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Citizens may address the committee on agenda items by responding to chair's call for speakers during discussion on each item and signing the speaker's log on the podium. All comments must be relevant to the item being heard. The chair or presiding officer may, in his or her discretion, prohibit a person from addressing the committee and/or remove that person from the council chambers if that person commits any disorderly or disruptive behavior. Please refer to the meeting agenda for more information about these requirements. If you parked in the Sheridan Walker parking garage north of John Rex Elementary School or in the Arts District parking garage just south of City Hall, staff can provide you with a parking validation ticket. The agenda and documents are located at the okc.primegov.com portal. You would select the Bricktown Urban Design Committee meeting. Once there, you would then click on an agenda item and related documents will come up below the item. Desiree, will you please call the roll?
Committee member Cancio.
Present.
Committee member Wall. Committee member Dotson.
Present.
Committee member Egon.
Here.
Committee member McGowan. Committee member Scaramucci. Committee member Thompson. Chairperson, we have quorum.
Great. So the next item is approval of the minutes for August 10th, 2022. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Avis moved.
I'll second.
Jonathan second.
Use our buttons.
Okay. There are no cases withdrawn.
We got to get the
Oh,
system.
oh yeah, okay. Mine's,
Oh, Jonathan moved in second. Okay, here we go.
that's it. Thank you.
Working on getting my. Yes, I'm affirmative.
So marked.
Is everybody able to vote on?
I have failed. I don't remember how to get back to the voting window.
Oh,
Hit live meeting at the top. Did you get to live meeting?
Yeah, I'm going to oh, there.
you click.
But my window's stuck.
I did vote yes.
Okay.
Would you like to second in that? But now it's not.
Are we able to get record of it and then move the screen forward?
I'm still showing Egon as not.
Oh, mine are laying on top of each other. Sorry, because it's asking me if I want a second, and I don't want someone already seconded.
There it goes.
So I just user error. Sorry.
Great. The motion passes. Okay. There are no cases withdrawn, no cases on the continuance request, no cases on the consent docket. Item number 6, cases for individual consideration. We have 2. Michael, would you tell us about that, please?
Sure. The first case is Item 6A, which is BCA 22-00010 at 613 East Sheridan Avenue. This is Phase 2 of the Steel Yards apartment complex on the north side of Sheridan at the corner of North Lincoln Boulevard. This is right next to the existing fire station on Lincoln and immediately east of Phase 1 of the Steel Yards complex. We've reviewed this project against the applicable development regulations and guidelines. We did outline for you in our staff report one concern about a guideline that talks about the design of parking structures when they face street frontages. And in this particular case, we flagged that concern with respect to the east elevation of the project that faces a very short segment of North Lincoln Boulevard. In our assessment of that particular guideline, clearly the applicant has addressed the guideline properly along the entire frontage of this project for East Sheridan Avenue, and that at the same time you have to balance the compliance with that guideline with the need for non-mechanical ventilation of the parking structure as well. So we've assessed that particular aspect of the project, and we've come to the conclusion that we believe that the applicant has struck a great balance between those two competing issues, and we're recommending approval of the project. And we're prepared to respond to any questions that the committee may have.
Were there any comments by the applicant?
Good morning, Mark Zitzow with Johnson & Associates. Address is 1 East Sheridan Avenue. With me today is Mr. Gary Brooks, who's the developer of the project. This is a project that I think has been a long time coming and we're very excited about. I think it gives Bricktown the opportunity to really expand to Lincoln in a way that is safe and comfortable for pedestrians. It's been, I think, a great project to work on, but not without its challenges. The site drops 9 feet over only 300 feet of span. So we've really worked with the architecture team and the developer to work out the most comfortable pedestrian experience that we can. If you've been on that corner of Lincoln, you can see there's a steep drop-off behind the curb. So we've done that to meet ADA and still have a comfortable pedestrian experience. Michael brought up, I think, really a good point, and if you were to look at the landscape plan, you'll see in addition along Lincoln Boulevard is screening with vegetation. So we've tried to address it the best we can to meet the intent of the guideline. But with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions, but we would ask for your approval.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any questions from the committee?
Turn on my microphone. I really like this project, and I move to approve.
Moved by Mr. McCowan and second by Scaramucci.
Committee Member McCowan, how do you vote?
Oh, you vote again. It was second by, there we go. Great. The motion passes. The item has been approved. So, thank you. Item number 2.
Yes, this is item 6B, BCA 22-00012 at 1 East Main Street. This is on the north side of East Main, just east of the BNSF Railroad Aqueduct. This is a site you might remember from, I think, about 2, maybe 3 years ago, where we had a demolition of an old brick warehouse structure, actually 2 on this site. And that demolition has obviously since taken place. And now the applicant is proposing a surface parking lot for this location. I don't know if I can get to where I need to go to, but So there you see the site highlighted in yellow. Like I said, it's north side of East Main, just east of the tracks. And they're proposing to create a surface parking lot with primary access off a private drive on the east side of the site and a secondary one-way entrance off of East Main. And then they're also proposing the parking lot landscaping, street trees, and the repair and replacement of missing segments of the existing fencing on the property. Here you can see some of the fencing that we're talking about in on the site, and there's also some along the frontage on East Main. We have assessed this application against the applicable development regulations and design guidelines for Bricktown. We did highlight for you in the staff report a couple of issues. One is that we did not receive in the submittal, and there was not enough time to put together the required lighting plan, photometric study to document that the parking lot will be in compliance with the applicable lighting standards. And we've indicated to the committee that we're prepared to address that as a condition of approval with the applicant submitting the required lighting plan to staff for approval prior to completion of the actual approval of the CA. Second item was an existing curb cut that is on East Main Street. We believe it was there for a while and removed and reinstalled by the city when they did the streetscape for this portion of East Main Street. When it was installed at a width that is not consistent with the current standards for driveway width. And the proposed driveway entrance, one-way entrance that they have coming off of this driveway is also sized to meet, or was originally sized to meet, the existing driveway cut. So we worked with the applicant on that particular issue and encouraged them to get to work on revising both the curb cut and then refining the design of the driveway that comes off of it so that it meets the minimum 12-foot width for a one-way drive. And we did cite the guideline that talks about minimizing vehicular access on the primary streets, but since we don't have an existing quote-unquote alleyway, which is what the guideline refers to, for them to take access from, and because the existing driveway is allowed by code, because every property is supposed to be able to have a driveway on their street frontage, we are prepared to recommend approval of the project with that driveway widened to 12 feet and the curb cut as well. And that completes our presentation. We're prepared to respond to any questions that the committee may have.
Any comments from the applicant?
Good morning, Mark Zitzan with Johnson & Associates. Address is 1 East Sheridan Avenue. This portion of Bricktown, as you're likely aware, is home to several office buildings. Our building is now, we office immediately south of this. It's a 7-story brick building that is now completely tenanted. And then you have growth of some energy companies that have occurred immediately east of here, as well as Heartland. So there's been a need for monthly parking for the office users in this area, and that's the intent of this parking lot, which is why you do not see control arms and pay booths and things like that. And so with regard to the entrance off of Main Street, when the city came in and did their streetscape, they put in a 10-foot wide driveway. Our intent and our preference would have been to maintain that curb cut, leave it in place, and use that as our access point. It had become clear in conversations with staff that to avoid a variance, we would have to widen it. While that was not our preference, we agreed to avoid the Board of Adjustment hearing. It is only being widened 2 feet to meet the minimum standard, and it is one way, and it is for the purpose of an inn. Part of the reason is in the morning, if things are picking up, there could be queuing and stacking for a future parking garage or the existing parking lot to the north. So to avoid that and allow the users of this parking lot, we wanted the one-way in off of Main Street to remain. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions. We've done our best to minimize that driveway and keep it as narrow as possible without having to widen it to a two-way. When you look at the street frontage, it's actually in the only place it can really go. There are fire hydrants, light poles, and street trees that we do not seek to remove or relocate.
Any comments from the committee or questions?
Yeah, it's probably more of a comment because I think I know the answers to the questions. I do have a few though. I less concerns or not very many concerns about the curb cuts and the design. I'm very familiar with this lot because it's adjacent to our building in Bricktown, and so I do get those needs. I wanted to clarify one thing. Did you say that this is going to be public parking? Or, I mean, you said there's no controlled access,
This is monthly
paid?
parking.
Okay. So I think that the challenge for me with this is just thinking a little more macro, a little more broadly about destroying buildings, even if they are buildings in significant disrepair in a historic overlay district that we have these sort of guidelines built around to install surface parking. I think initially the conversation, and I absolutely understand both the needs and the economics of this proposal, but I'm just challenged because it just feels like a really bad thing to do in a historic district where I can make the case for a lot of buildings that were in disrepair being torn down. I mean, some buildings that we would never want to see torn down that are vacant right now can fall into disrepair. Spaghetti warehouse, I mean, those kind of things. Like, okay, well, let's just tear it down or hollow it out and put a parking garage in there or put some surface parking there. The economics might actually work to do something like that. So I know there was a building here for years. The conversation was about that building potentially being a detriment to getting structured parking, which I think is a much different conversation in this district because it actually allows us the long-term ability to preserve the historic nature of Bricktown by preserving the buildings because we got structured parking that can carry more volume. And so, I mean, maybe just a year after the fact, we're coming back with a parking lot proposal, and it's basically bringing a lot of the parking that is hidden when we can in Bricktown straight to the street. So for me, it's a challenge because I don't think the design aesthetics, I mean, it does look like we have some landscaping and things, but it doesn't, I mean, we're not doing anything compelling. It is a surface parking lot, and it's just hard for me to get behind it, even though I really, really understand the dynamics and the drivers for it. We're on this body to talk about historic preservation. Seems like this is the opposite, or not historic preservation, but preservation of these design guidelines in a historic district, and this seems like the opposite of that. So that wasn't really a question. That was more of commentary.
To echo your comment, Sandino, I would hope that when the parking garage gets built, this stops being a parking garage and becomes a building. And because it's, on the frontage, because it's right there at the entry to Bricktown, when we did the shipping container project, just at the other end of this massive parking lot, we were given a 10-year allowance for it because it says corrugated metal, and that's prohibited in downtown. It's outside of Bricktown. It's in the downtown design review district, and so soon we got to come back and beg to keep staying there. And I'm a little bit inclined to suggest that, like, give you a temporary approval on this. Like, y'all can have this parking lot for 10 years, and then you got to come back and explain yourselves as to why you didn't build a building when the parking garage gets built. Given that it needs to become a building, why do you need the curb cut? The curb cut does seem like it eliminates potential for on-street parking there. I don't know that there is any there at the moment, but on-street parking in Bricktown would do more to generate retail activity in Bricktown than just about anything. Private parking is probably the #1 reason that we don't have retail thriving in Bricktown. And if we could come in with, a road diet for Reno, I am now way off the topic and I'm gonna keep going. If we could come in with a road diet for Reno and do on-street parking everywhere that we could think of it, we could transform Bricktown, and you would have, it's a game of roulette. You know, you think, oh, well, let's meet and go have lunch in Bricktown. You might only have to pay $2 for parking, but right now your expectation is you might come to Bricktown and have to pay $15 for parking. That makes for a really expensive lunch date. So people elect to go across the street to the shopping center that is lower Bricktown because there's a perception of free parking, or they go to other parts of the city that have an abundance of on-street parking. So I'm always against curb cuts that are gonna eliminate the potential for more on-street parking, but I really wanna come back and explore this idea of giving you just like a 10-year approval on this, because that wasn't what we came in to ask for the OKC development. We just wanted, you know, approval for that cool thing. And because it was temporary in nature, you know, it's designed to be taken apart and put back on trucks and moved to some other place and eventually build a larger, more permanent building. You know, we're like, okay, whatever, we'll go with this 10-year temporary approval. So I'm inclined to move that we give you a 10-year approval. I have no idea what kind of can of worms I just opened from a legal standpoint or from a planning standpoint, and I apologize, I mean, for throwing that on you, but I would really love to see this come back as a building when the parking garage gets built.
I think you can put terms and conditions in a certificate of appropriateness.
Given that it was done to me, I'm not surprised that that's the answer. And I'm not trying to just do stress displacement. I'm learning about that anyway, so.
Richard, just to piggyback that, I think part of the frustration with being on this side is you're trying to figure out how to hold developers accountable when they say they're going to do something. And so, you know, I think if 2 years ago we would have been told we were going to tear a building down to build a surface lot, we would have just said, no, that's not okay, right? And we would have put our foot down. And so there's always a tendency to want to give a little bit to be, to assume the best. But to Sandino's point, tearing down a building to put a surface lot, no matter whether it's 10 years or not, I'm just looking at this, and this is a sea of parking, and there's other uses that could be here. I don't know what grounds I would personally have to deny the application, but man, is like, it just doesn't, it's not how I want this district to be treated. And, you know, if we have another developer come in and say, hey, I want to tear this down, I think we have to show that we're willing to hold people accountable for what they present, especially when it comes down. I mean, if any city in America should care about their leftover building stock, it should be Oklahoma City because of our history. And so to, at this point, allow a building to get torn down to do this seems like it goes against everything that we would actually state we would want. So that's where I'm at. Doesn't mean anyone else needs to be there, but I'm not even cool with 10 years, like a 10-year temporary parking. It's like they shouldn't have torn this down to build surface parking. So.
He's opposed to it.
Yeah, because I'm not okay with someone telling us they're going to tear a building down to put a parking structure and then coming back and saying we're just going to do surface parking. Because I wouldn't have voted to allow the building to be torn down in the first place.
Mr. Chair,
If I may, real quick.
this site is not the site where a structured parking lot was proposed.
Yeah, that's,
The site that you're concerned about where the structured parking was proposed is to the north of
yeah.
that site.
so I want to clarify, because I also want to clarify my comments just briefly, but I also want to clarify because I think I voted against it, and it really may be against my own interest because we use the surface sea of parking for our building that is bursting at the seams. So I do understand the challenges, right? But in good conscience, I can't sit on this body and sort of be on board with tearing down buildings for parking. What was proposed at that time?
I understand the concern.
What was proposed, what was suggested was that this building, that the building that existed here was going to be an impediment to the development of that structured parking that would go behind it.
Oh.
That was very strongly proposed. I remember it very clearly. And so at this point, it's not like, so if this was a proposal to create access to, better access to the back portion of the sea of parking in anticipation of structured parking going up, and maybe even getting back to, I think Richard's a very good point about even creating on-street parking, maybe in an avenue, back to that, I would have a different sort of response to it. We're creating a parking lot, not creating the drive that was supposedly going to be necessary to make that structured parking functional. So it makes, I mean, I don't know the status of the structured parking. I don't know if that's still ever gonna be a thing or in my lifetime. And I really don't wanna sort of get to the point of like thinking ahead or anticipating other folks' motives, because I really don't think this is about that. It's just hard for me from a historic district design review standpoint to tear down a building to put service parking lots up. And I actually very much resonate with this idea of the challenge of curb cuts. And what I will say is existing, I mean, I'll go through this parking lot go through this drive every day to get into the parking lot. It's already challenging. So I don't know, I mean, I guess I would amend my statement to say I probably do care about the curb cut on Main Street, because the on-street parking thing is a big deal. I mean, we had 40 folks in town from Louisiana yesterday. And the dynamic for us to get them to our building was to say, hey, we have on-street parking, like pull up, pay the meter, and walk right in. And it was convenient for 3 carloads full of people from Louisiana to be able to do that versus hunt around for parking spaces and parking garages and try and get to our building. And that's not a retail use, it is a thing, so, sorry.
So if I may respond briefly, I think when this was originally torn down in 2019, we were not part of the project, so I can't speak to what was said, what wasn't, or what was maybe committed to. I think the application before you is for a parking lot that meets the allowed uses, and we're here asking for the approval of the design of said parking lot. The use is allowed by right in this district, so I think that's a separate conversation. While maybe worthwhile, I don't think is what is before the board today.
I would echo my colleagues' comments, because I very much appreciate that as well, that I would expect probably a much more sort of comprehensive and long-term sort of viewpoint on the design of a parking lot in regards to our guidelines. So it may meet the minimum standard, but I would probably expect something more given the location and its proximity to structured parking and other things and where it's located on Main Street.
My memory of the parking garage development, because they're 2 different property ownerships, but it's similar, a related development interest spanning across them both, was the parking garage was kind of this slightly tilted thing that a corner of it got onto this property. But I may be totally misremembering that.
It was tilted to align with the north line of the northerly surface parking lot, but did not expand onto this site.
Okay, and there's also some easement considerations for a
Yes.
future rail spur that runs through
Yep.
there. All of that said, best I can come up with is to make this temporary in approval, just because it is complicated and there someday will get a parking garage built there, I'm sure. I hope it'll happen within the next 10 years, especially given all the other dynamics with, other things happening on the other side of the railroad tracks to the west. But if it's temporary, the curb cut seems unnecessary. And, because your argument for having it is to make it easier to use this parking lot once there's a parking garage there. Once there's a parking garage there, I really want to see this built back as a building. And, your last client is going to tremendous expense of building a parking garage and then putting residential structures on top of it, lining it with retail. It's extraordinary. At the far end of Bricktown. This is at the This is at the welcoming end, the interface end, the juxtaposition with the central business district. So it would be nice if eventually something magical happened here. And I think if we just give you, unconditional approval forever, it can stay like this for a long, long, long time. So if we're gonna approve it, I would like to put the 10-year condition on it.
So
I'm not suggesting we approve it. I'm just saying that's the best we can do. I'll leave it to someone else to move to.
I think as a neighbor to this property, I think we have the same hope and vision for one day that a building is there. And if a building is placed there, I think at that point it may be an appropriate time for the curb cut to go away. This was a curb cut that was put back in by the city, and the staff report indicates that we are requesting to maintain the owner's access rights to Main Street. Every property is entitled access to their property from legal street frontage. Ours is Main Street. We've narrowed the curb as much as necessary. So I do think if a future building comes in, that would be an appropriate time to request the elimination of a curb cut. In this area, we have minimal frontage, so at best you pick up a handful of on-street parking spaces. And then I think we would like to further discuss the idea of a limited approval when it comes to a use. I think in your scenario, I was not part of that project, but you were granted limited approval because of an architectural material, which is significantly different than the use of a property that an owner is entitled to under the zoning code they currently have for their property today. So I think it's a little bit different to put a sunset on a use unit, which we've gone through this at City Council in PUDs and SPUDs, and that has never been the City Attorney's Office of a way to do that, because ultimately you are taking away someone's right at a time set in the future. So I think we would ask for approval as we have it presented today, but we'd be happy to discuss if it's additional landscaping. We're happy to keep the drive at the width it is today. If you don't want to see it widened to 12 feet, we'd be amenable to that. But we would ask for your approval on the parking lot.
I think I would not want to. So getting back to the things that are our purview, I would not want to approve the design of this parking. I don't disagree with the use. Obviously, that's a factual statement. I wouldn't agree with the design of the parking. I think the curb cut should probably be as small as possible, or left as is. And I think for this property being a gateway into Bricktown, this design, as it's proposed for this parking lot, is not sufficient, in my humble opinion.
What is the status of the driveway on the east side? How is it that you're able to get a curb cut off of it?
Can you go to the site plan?
It's our understanding at staff is that driveway is part and parcel of the surface parking lot to the north under the same ownership. And we thought that that parcel and the driveway, the private drive to East Main, and this parcel were all under the same ownership. And I think that was true until about a year, maybe a year and a half ago.
Okay.
But I think when Bank First got involved, I believe, at least by the name of the property ownership, I don't think Don is involved in the ownership of the northerly lot anymore. Do you?
I can't speak to the northern lot. I don't know.
I think that they are separate ownership now, but the property owner on this side has some sort of access rights to this private drive on the east.
Okay. And does that, do we know if that's temporary in nature or if that's a permanent access easement? Because if it is a permanent access easement, then that should satisfy access to the property and argue for the elimination of the curb cut. I'm fine to leave the curb cut at 10 feet and support any variance at that, because all driving lanes should only be 10 feet wide ever. Here's a thought, controversial one. What if you shifted this whole thing back? I can't zoom in and, well, oh, yeah, I can. Wow, magic. So you shifted the whole thing back about 40, 41 feet and left a lot that could be built on to put a frontage building that was basically, 35, 40 feet deep. All it would involve would be shift your ADA parking spaces up to that next tier. And that way we, at least or have a placeholder for a small building that could function there and hold the street edge. And if you do indeed have a permanent easement to take your access from the East Drive, then you really don't need the curb cut. And then, something charming could go in there. Maybe a shipping container development. Just kidding. This is
Only for 10
Bricktown, by
years,
golly.
right?
We don't have corrugated metal in Bricktown. But you could do it for less money than you could develop shipping containers. You could put in a brick and mortar building there. And we could even give them a blessing to do like a simple single story, because I know there's a requirement for, something to be tall, 3-story minimum or something.
We'd be happy to discuss that with our client. I think 1 story, I think would also require variances and would not meet the intent of the code. But I think further, if a building gets placed there, I think it more than likely means the full property is likely to be a parking lot behind it for much longer than if it was all a surface parking lot today and a parking garage was to be constructed. So be happy to take that back to them and discuss if that's kind of the will of the commission at this point.
I'd be happy to move to continue the item.
There's also the lighting plan that was not also provided, is that correct?
Correct.
Is that part of the requirements
Yes.
for approval?
Yes.
So we
We
probably
agree
would-
to that condition. That's not a problem. We can provide one.
Is this on? I have a question. And Michael, this might be for you, I'm not sure. I just thought that there was a new, and this new movement is fairly old at this point, but there was a push to really be selective about the use of land in Bricktown as it pertains to surface parking lots, because, and goodness knows, I would be the first one to say, we need parking in Bricktown. And I also know, because of my own experiences, that creating parking garages is a very expensive project. But I thought there was a push, and I thought the city even felt that way, that we needed to discontinue poor use of the land and do something that was more conducive to creating the Bricktown that I aspire to. Is that a correct assumption?
No, what you're stating is correct, but under the current regs, the way they're written, the use of land as a standalone surface parking lot is a permitted use. The only restriction that we have on the books in the Bricktown Code right now with respect to the location of such facilities is not to be placed on a corner lot.
Okay.
Now, the private drive that you see on the east side of this does not, in effect, make this a corner lot. It's not a street. It's not a public street. And because it's not a public street, this lot is not considered a corner lot.
Okay.
So we did think about that when we first saw the application
Yeah.
come in, but it's just not something that we have anything on the books to deny on the basis of the fact that it's a surface lot or that it's on a corner lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy you made that distinction, because I mean, my thoughts increasingly just go back to what is the purview and the purpose of this body and the guidelines. And I would almost say that I think that is a bit of a technicality, because it abuts the viaduct, which is not a public street, but it is very much a piece of it's a piece of traffic infrastructure.
Right.
And then it abuts what is a private drive, but very much a private drive for public use, right? So it's not like it's a private drive into a building, but it's a private drive. So even on those grounds, I would say this use and this design, in my mind, just doesn't meet the threshold or the expectations for what I would expect at this location for parking lot. I mean, and we could say the same if there was a building. We've had some buildings that the designs have seemed to be in keeping with creating more street traffic, like maintaining this historic fabric. I don't think this design as presented accomplishes those goals.
So I'll reiterate, the staff, the professional planners that work for the city, the independent reviewers of this application reviewed it, said that they found it in compliance with the use and the design, and they mentioned two issues, one being a lighting plan, which we will submit, and that is fine as a condition, and the second being discussion, but not an objection to the curb cut. This is not a corner lot. I understand that it is adjacent to a railroad, which then there is a E.K. Gaylord, which would make a corner, but this is not a corner lot. So that portion of the regulations would not apply, which is why staff has recommended approval of the application. I'd say if a continuance is sought, I think we'd be agreeable if we can have a discussion as to what you'd want to see when we come back. Because if we come back in a month and the conversation is the same, and you're opposed to it, and there's nothing we can do, then I don't see the value in a continuance at this point. If it was, you need to talk about removing a curb cut, you need to add landscaping, and there was something tangible that we can go back and have a discussion with our client to bring back before you, I think that's a different scenario than taking a month to come back with the same design and go back through this again.
That seems fair. I just texted you this little sketch, and I have no idea how many rules I'm breaking here. It's suggesting a small building. What is our minimum height that we have to have in Bricktown? Is it 3 stories?
It's not something I was prepared to discuss today, but I think it's 3 stories.
I think it's 3 stories too, but 3-story buildings are really expensive to build compared to 1-story buildings. And there's not enough room on this little diagram I sent to do a 3-story building. It won't work. I can tell you if you brought back a development plan with this surface parking lot and that little building there as a 1-story building with a minimum ceiling height of 14 feet, something, appropriately retail, I would move to approve that. I really would. And even if your lighting plan sucks, I would move to approve it. Clearly, it needs to meet the regulations, but I can't speak for the rest of this group. But I think seriously, like we just don't need these kind of surface parking lots that go on and on and on. They're not a good thing, and we need more parking. I'm
Absolutely.
yeah. So I want to meet you in the middle, but I don't know. I texted it to you too. You see if you.
Is there, I did have a question. Is there anything in our guidelines about the validation of adding more parking versus like how much it's meeting the need? Does that make sense? Like if we add more surface parking in order to meet what percentage of population's parking needs, anything like that, that we say this is a valid need, and that it's going to meet a certain percentage of need or something like that, or no, because it only meets, it limits the actual amount that could be used.
No, we don't have any metrics like that or any assessment like that. And one thing to remember is, even if they put a small building or even a 3-story building on this property, they wouldn't have to meet the parking code because parking's not required in Bricktown. So if they were short on parking in the portion of the northerly portion of the lot for whatever building they put up on the south portion of the lot, it wouldn't be a big deal. I would caution you, however, that if you were to suggest to the applicant that you would support a 1-story building on this site, they still would require a variance and would have to go to the Board of Adjustment.
And I think that the fact that there's someone here with businesses telling them that they're going to rent or lease monthly spaces from them says that there is a demand for that in this particular location. And so I understand that it's not what this commission deems as the most desirable land use, but it is a land use that is allowed by right. And so if the request is a continuance for us to go back and talk about leaving a future pad site that's approximately 40 feet deep, we'd be happy to go back and have that conversation. Ultimately, I don't know if that's what he is envisioning for the property, so I can't commit that we can agree to that. If that's the reason for the continuance, we'll happily take it and go do some fact-finding. But if there's any other thing, because of the way this board is structured, we cannot have conversations outside of this, so I do appreciate the back and forth, but we can better understand how we can maybe come to a decision either today or next month.
Yeah, I think I suggested that I would be happy to move for continuance for there to be an opportunity to process the feedback. I'm also happy to move, well, not happy. I am content to move to deny the request. And I'm fully accepting everything you're saying. I understand exactly what's being said and what we're talking about. I just don't think the design is sufficient. And actually, I don't think that my thoughts about what kind of parking structure should go at this site is probably going to meet with the desire of your client either. I mean, it probably looks something like structured parking with retail at the bottom. That's probably the kind of parking that I would be on board with or willing to accept, given what I believe is a technicality. And I'm happy for the city council and other folks to sort of take these comments and do with what they will, because we're just an advisory body. But given what I think is the technicality of both the use case, don't agree. I agree technically that may be the case. I think practically and with the intent of the ordinances, this is a corner lot. It is prominent. It is an entry point to Bricktown. It deserves a design aesthetic that improves sort of the character and historic nature of the neighborhood, and this doesn't do that. So I'm happy to also, I'm happy to move for continuance if it allows a more broader conversation, but I'm also content to move to deny the application based on the grounds that I don't think the design is sufficient for this location, even if technically this use is allowable.
I would add one correction that in your role today, you're not advisory. You are the approver or denier of an application, and in this case, it's an application that meets, according to your professional staff, the regulations and the guidelines for them. And so I would maybe defer to the city attorney on if we're talking about a denial, it'd be on what grounds could the application be denied?
A continuance would be beneficial to me to allow me to do additional legal research in what are the limits of the authority of this committee.
My understanding, and this is, you're getting pathetic legal advice from a non-attorney who's gone to a few trainings on this, but if we do deny it, it kicks you back having to go before city council to overturn our denial or something like that. So
We would go before the Board of Adjustment if you all sought to deny it.
fair enough. But it gives you the runaround and pain and suffering that I'm wanting to avoid you having to go through. Let me ask the other members of this committee, my suggestion here of a single-story building that's, got an interior ceiling height of 14 feet, which would require them to go get a variance from another approving body, but if it came with a recommendation from us, they probably would get that. The investment of a small, 35-foot deep, single-story building is really easy to tear that building down at a later date when there's a major parking garage there that justifies an office building being built here with retail on the ground floor. I'm not asking for a big investment in this future building, and I'm not even asking you to build the building. You very clearly picked up that I hold it as a pad site. We would want to see it landscaped, to try and soften the impact of parking here. But I do think that that's all of a sudden becomes a really viable real estate development, just a small little, retail building that doesn't cost very much per square foot to build, could have a lot of appeal to tons of future clients. And the variance we would need to all be on board with would be to support the one-story small building as opposed to the three-story building. And I put that out to the rest of my commissioners here to see whether or not they would support that.
Well, that is a lot going on. I've been trying to take notes here. Is the committee moving towards a, does anybody have any comments on Richard's, with Richard?
I mean, that would be the only way I would consider, as long as I have the right to deny it, a way to approve it would be if we did something like that. I think I would share the same boat that Sandino's currently in, but if there is a way to provide a recommendation for a variance so that you can put something there, at least it protects that, regardless of the technicality, a corner lot. That would be my thought.
So,
But you would support the one-storiness? Okay.
Yep. Yeah, pad site, yeah.
so that would not be necessarily a continuance, but it would be a recommendation.
I would, it may be better if we continuance and we hear
No,
what.
that's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
It would be beneficial to me.
And we want to
Yeah.
continue it with the recommendation that
Yes.
they bring that back.
Okay.
Yes,
And that that they could count on us to support the one-story variance that they would have to go seek.
Count on all of us but Brent. He's not here, so, and he may be adamantly opposed to anything. I don't want to speak for him. So I would say that if we're talking about a pad site, it seems like it seems like a way to meet in the middle, which I am in no way opposed to. I do get the challenges of what's being proposed and the bigger dynamics. And a pad site would at least be consistent with the positioning of this site and allow not just this body, because it's not. it ain't about us, I don't think, but the design intent of this district, of this design review district. It would allow you then to come back and look at what was being proposed on that pad site, which is the street-facing, pedestrian interacting thing. So if that is something that's amenable with the client, then I think it absolutely is worth us taking a look at that conversation. And if this was proposed with a pad site, with the pad site, frankly, even TBD, that would be fine. That would be better to me than a 10-year, or I was leaning more towards 5-year sort of use of a parking structure, because this would sort of set the tone for whatever happens next would just fall back into the process.
Yeah. Okay.
So what I'm hearing from the committee is that because this location is such a prominent location entering to the district, and the vision for the district as a walkable district, and understanding the need of parking, but also wanting to preserve the walkability nature of it, we would like to propose a continuance with the request that the applicant speak to the owner for a potential vision to come back with it being a pad site, potentially a one-story. The committee would support that vision, and then also we would also support a variance to limit the curb cuts to 10 feet as well. And then,
Well,
With no
I-
need for the
Fine.
curb cut if we
Oh,
leave it as a
if you leave it as a
pad
pad site, there would be no need for a curb cut, that's right. And then, is there anything else that I'm missing on this?
I'd like to, before we go any further down this line, I'd like to make a couple of clarifications and make sure we all understand we're on the same page. Committee Member McCown, your recommendation for a building on the front of the lot, does that include the elimination of the driveway or the retention of the driveway on Main?
I think it includes an elimination of the driveway. Because I'd like to see the building go from property line to property line as much as possible, as much as is feasible. And so there's not really any need for the driveway. We, of course, if you come back and tell us, well, we have to have it for access to the property, we're going to want to see the access agreement for the East Drive, because I think you have access to your property through the East Drive.
Second point of clarification, if you were to continue it with the intent of seeing this building proposed, are you suggesting that you want to see the site plan back for the parking lot with just a parcel cut out for that building, or do you want to see the design of the building in conjunction with the parking lot?
It's a great question, and I don't think I think if they'll just leave a space for the building, and that we somehow capture in some language of this approval that a single-story building can be built there with a minimum ceiling height of 14 feet, that would be enough.
Okay.
And that the expectation then would be that when they bring it back, it needs to be a proper building with windows and eyes on the street and a pedestrian-friendly, we don't want it to be storage with corrugated metal.
Right. Okay, so the reason I was shooting for that clarification is it makes a difference on the timing for how long you continue it. Obviously, if you don't need to see the building, all they need to do is modify the site plan a little bit, pull the parking back and revise it. That's a quick fix.
Yeah.
That they could do probably by next week, which they would need to do by next week to be on the November agenda. If they needed to see the building, or if you needed to see the building, that would probably take more time, and we'd be
Right.
looking at least December, if not January, for continuance. So
Yeah.
I just want to get that out there and make sure that when you're continuing, it, we know what we're continuing it for and how long we need to continue it for.
Yeah.
We would be agreeable for a continuance to November. So, yeah, we will, if our client wants to move forward with that, we can revise it and get it back to Michael next week. I do just, so I can properly relay, if they are unwilling at this point to revise the parking lot design, it sounds like we're headed toward a denial here, and I'm still a little squishy on why that is. So I want to properly relay, and it's, you believe that the corner lot is not, the intent is not being met?
So I can only speak for myself, and I think that, from not from understanding our authorities within the context of the city, but just my understanding of parliamentary procedure. So I think you've gotten the feedback from all of the folks who are willing to speak to it. I can speak for myself because I'm pretty clear about if these changes aren't amenable, I do not think this design sufficiently meets what my threshold would be for approval. So I would move to deny this request based on that design. I think reasoning behind that, sort of notes for however this got kicked to the next body that has to deliberate on it, is I think that the intent of the ordinances around this corner thing, this corner element, and frankly, the language around our purview and reviewing for, in keeping with sort of the condition and the fabric of the neighborhood, I don't think this meets that criteria. I think it's technically a corner. I think even if it wasn't a corner, I would still think the design I think it would require more substantial design because of its location. That's not in our purview or exceeds our authority, then I would still vote to deny it. I'm not compelled to vote for something. I'm only compelled to give my feedback and then maybe create headaches for the city because I've denied something that is allowable by right. But so that's where I would stand on it, is that if we didn't go with these changes, I would not approve the design as presented. That wouldn't mean that there wouldn't be a different design that might be approved. Not really, it wouldn't speak to use, but it would speak to the fact that I do think this is a corner, and this corner should have some sense of prominent structure and whatever is built back on it.
That's extremely helpful, and I think maybe rephrase on the design, are there any design changes to what's proposed that if we can't agree to a pad site that you would like to see for the parking lot?
I do not think so, okay. Because I think that, I mean, but you know, and for again, speaking for myself, I mean, something more substantial, you know, and I'll borrow Richard's conversations about Times Square and some other things that he's had about different parts of Bricktown. I mean, something substantial at this corner that was a design that was really intended to draw people into the district as a use for this corner and this parcel of land. I would absolutely look at with very wide open eyes for all of the uses that are allowed in Bricktown. This parking lot, as it's proposed with some trees and things of that nature, doesn't sort of present that. And if this was maybe in a different location, I think it would be an easier thing to sort of just get to the bare basics of what the requirements are.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mark, to the other point about the why, it does go back to Sandino's point earlier. There was a building here, and we were asked to bless the tearing down of that building. It was an old, dilapidated building. It set back from the street. It wasn't a great building, wasn't a perfect building, but it did hold the corner, and it did some things. And you know, the expectation was that a new building would come back here at some point, especially given that, you know, the parking garage was going to get developed to the north. And so I think just that history of that conversation, the implications, whether or not they were actually said or just implied, and we ran with our imagination, it doesn't really matter. That this doesn't feel good, and that's good enough. You know, the fact that had it been clear up front and they said, we want to tear this building down and build this parking lot, we'd have been like, no, do something better. And we'd have hashed it out then. And we didn't get to do that. And I believe that what I'm saying, I'm almost implying there was a bait and switch, and that's not what I'm trying to say. What I'm trying to say is there was an expectation that that parking garage was going to get built imminently, and that was going to break open the site for more intensive development, and something probably more like a proper 3-story building that took up quite a bit of this lot, maybe not the entirety of it. But that all said, had we not all been sitting up here in 2019 when the building was asked to be torn down, had we been looking at it holistically, all of these things chained together as one, we're going to tear it down and do this. It's just a very long conversation that I wish we'd had the same reaction back then, justifiably so.
Understood. I appreciate that.
Can I make one more comment just as I'm sitting here thinking about things? Because I really believe in the rights of property owners. But I also believe that like we're in a design review district, right? And that's always, to me, the countervailing thing, because property owners essentially have a narrower set of rights in a design review district. And I mean, unless they were legacy property owners before that got established, I mean, you essentially signed up for it. So like when you buy buildings or when you buy property in Bricktown, you're signing up for a design review process. So from that standpoint, the inherent rights seem to be also informed by like what the intent is of the neighborhood. Anyway, say all that to say that, I mean, we talked about a pad site, like thinking about that as, I mean, a pedestrian plaza, you know, other thing. I mean, it's just something that activates when people come into Bricktown. They're not just going to see, the first thing they see is cars on both sides. To me, that's important, and it means something. And this is a functional sort of corner, if you will, of, I mean, it is the corner actually of Main Street's entrance into Bricktown. You know, whether it fits as a corner per the regulations or interpretation of them. So though, any of those things just is a different conversation than just literally, we're gonna put a parking lot up and, you know, in a few years it might get a fence or something in front of it or whatever the case, right? So I don't know what those things are. I don't want to sort of suggest what the uses are for you or your client, but it's just, that's kind of, I guess, even a part of the point. I don't know if it's a building or not. I've kind of pulled away from a one-story building. I'm happy to do those things if it's helpful, because I do think anything we can do to be helpful, I want to be helpful. But it's really just like not surface parking lot up to Main Street, right? But the design I would want to see is, even if it's a surface parking lot, let's set the tone for how a surface parking lot is going to improve the pedestrian experience of Bricktown, which is one of our best pedestrian corridors in the entire city, in our entertainment district, and set the tone for create more vibrancy versus detracting from that.
I appreciate that as well, and we'll go back and look at if it's not a building, are there other things that we can do to activate that in a different way. I would just point out, I agree that when business owners or property owners come in, they are agreeing to a set of restrictions. I think the difference is it becomes a very slippery slope if we decide we don't like a use, because there would be nothing from the same conversation happening around a hotel coming in and saying, well, we think Bricktown has too many hotels. We need people living here, or we don't need another restaurant. What we need is, we don't want a nightclub because we've gone away from that in the district. And I think that's the difference there, in that the uses are permitted by right.
And I want to be clear that I absolutely appreciate that and have no issue with parking. In fact, the challenge for me is that if this lot gets built, my firms will likely be some of those tenants, right? Or we will absorb the parking that these folks are using. So this isn't about a use for or against parking. It's about, should this proposal, in my mind, be what people see on Main Street? And I do think if you come in with a hotel, it's really not about whether I like your use, but it is whether I like your hotel. And so what we have done and said and communicated to hoteliers is that, like, the expectations might be a little bit different than if you were going to go just on the other side of Lincoln, which has happened, and just build something, right? Because we do want to pay attention to interaction with the street. We do want to pay attention to not just the use of materials, but how they're going to hold up over time, and the timelessness of this historic district. This parking lot is not timeless, and it's not even generational. It's not long-lived. And so, if the proposal here was interesting, unique, different, innovative, or somehow connected with the other historic fabric in the community, as designers or even as developers, like, give me the surface parking lot that actually does the opposite of what this design will do, which is detract from the vibrancy of the community. And that is, we're trying to preserve that sort of historic fabric, right?
Where does that leave us? Do I need to make a motion in a formal way and try and sum all this up?
Yeah,
Yes.
go for it.
This will be fun.
I move for a continuance for you guys to go back and redraw this, creating the space for a future pad site that is around 35-ish feet deep. Work it out. We don't need to see architecture. And we will approve at some future date a building to be built on that site that's only 1 story tall with a minimum of 14-foot clear ceilings on the inside.
We will approve something.
We'll approve something.
We would be supportive.
We'll be
Right.
supportive of a building that meets all the other guidelines except for the 3-story.
Reviewed at the time of
Yeah, it needs to
submission.
at least have 14
One
foot
point of
ceilings.
clarification, I think we're going to go back and we're going to talk to the client. I think with your motion, it dictates that we come back with another plan. And if they're not willing to agree, I guess we're still willing to do that. But if he's not willing to add the pad site, do you still need a drawing that shows it if that's not the request?
Yeah, the applicant has the option of coming back with the same plan.
Oh, no, I totally understand
Okay.
that.
That's just what we're
So-
basing the
so it could
continuance
be
on,
just-
right? Yeah.
We move to continue? Did you just make it that simple?
Yeah, so we're,
Yeah.
There you go.
Please.
That was easy to sum up. Move to continue.
yeah, so somebody is, Richard has moved to continue the item,
I'll second that.
and Jonathan has seconded that. Okay, the item has been continued.
Thank you all for your time, and we'll
Thank
see you next month.
Thank you for your time. Other business, it's on the agenda is a 2023 big.
Next item on the agenda is the 2023 calendar for the Bricktown Urban Design Committee meeting schedule, and this is something we normally do at this time of year. The schedule you see before you is predicated on the same parameters that we always set it up on, which is the meeting date being on the second Wednesday of every month, with the deadlines for those meetings being the Tuesday prior to the meeting in the prior month. And so all these dates are corresponding with that protocol, and we're recommending approval to the committee of this calendar.
Can
I have a question.
Is there comments?
Yeah, and this is something that never occurred to me to ask. Does the process of submitting and the timing of when submittals come in to then getting on to the next meeting, it feels like it's kind of, it may be a bit onerous, but it may be the best we can do too, right? Because I was thinking about you saying, well, they'd have to get some things for next week if they wanted to get on the agenda for November. And this is truly a question. You guys do yeoman's work, so I'm not trying to make things more difficult.
Right.
I just wonder, is there a different, would it make any sense to relook at the timing of those things? Is that even our purview?
Well, you can see right below at the end of your agenda, there's a discussion about the November meeting, and it talks about a deadline for the initial submittals and then a separate deadline for continued projects. Gives them an extra week, which
Okay.
is what the week we were talking about here on the last project. I do want to point out that we've added language at the bottom of this calendar that makes it clear to the applicant that the application they submit has to be complete, accurate, and paid for by that deadline. We've run into a lot of problems with people submitting like at 4 o'clock on the deadline date, and it's a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And we end up not being able to deal with that. And so we wanted to point out with this footnote at the bottom of the page that just because you meet the deadline doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be on that agenda unless you've done everything you're supposed to do, X, Y, Z. So is your question really more about?
It's more so like a question of, is this schedule working for you all, for city staff? Is there something we could do or should do differently?
I don't know. Truth be told, we're under a lot of pressure with
Yeah.
all these deadlines. Laura and I handle 5 design review committees, and they're just like week. And we're always putting out a packet. But that's the way it's been for the whole 10 years I've been here, and nobody that we've talked to seems to be inclined to change it, so.
So let me adjust my statement to be a little more forward. I recognize those things and want to figure out if there's anything we can do from this side to be more helpful or even recommend or suggest changes in meeting cadence and things that are our purview that just might allow for that. And that's all I'm asking. If the answer is, nah, you don't know or whatever, then that's cool too, Michael.
I think for the sake of 2023, we should probably just go with this calendar, and maybe we would talk about it next year.
Sure.
And when we get ready to put the 24 calendar together, we can take those items into consideration.
Yeah, and blame it on Richard, like that we want to relook at it.
Yeah.
So it's not. So it's not about you guys, but it's about, I think, us wanting to make sure that we're making life easier.
Well, I'm glad you bring this up, and I'm not trying to, create more work at all. And Michael, to your point, I know what a mess can look like, because believe me, I've been involved in turning a mess in. Not for this committee, but I wonder if it might be possible to avoid what happened here today, if we created yet so we've got submittal and then resubmittal for continuance, what if we had the mess submittal for discussion only? And we have had a couple of items come in, you know, Anthony came in and made that great
We've always had that
presentation.
opportunity to have applicants, we've always offered it to them to come before the committee just to make an informal presentation to get feedback. And that happens a lot on some of the bigger projects. I don't think we would have suggested it on this project, and I don't think the applicant would have taken our suggestion if we did.
Yeah, I'm sure that that's true. I guess what I'm saying is, would it be appropriate at some point to think through a shorter deadline? Like you could submit the mess for discussion, you know, like a week before we meet, or
Well-
something, without it making a.
Okay, you have to bear in mind that we are putting these packets out a week before the agenda. So to get on in the packet, they would probably need to be into us 2 weeks before the
Okay.
meeting. And frankly, we don't have any deadlines for those informal presentations.
Oh, well, there
These
you go.
deadlines that you see on this calendar apply to formal submittals that are going before the committee for action.
Okay.
If somebody wants to come to us and make an informal presentation and get on an agenda, our arms are wide open, and we don't really have any deadlines that apply as long as they give us enough time to stick it in the packet.
Perfect.
I need to ask whomever's permission I need to leave. Is there a vote or something that,
Thought you were gonna
Yeah, you
move
do need to make a
approve it.
motion and a second and a vote
On this item?
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and move, can I get a motion to approve the
I move
meeting
to
for
approve the item.
2020? Okay, it's moved
Second.
by Santino, second by Richard.
I think Avis moved to adjourn.
Um,
I want to second her motion.
It looks
well,
like the- is
just
that
quickly before I leave,
the item
Michael,
that-
I don't think you and I anymore will discuss about,
See?
see?
I
Yes.
told you.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, so the motion passes, so item number 8.
Yes, we had one administrative approval since the last time we met, and that was for a standalone storage building clad in brick at the Casey's at the corner of East Main and South Lincoln.
Okay, our next meeting is for Wednesday, November 9th. Looks like we will have that meeting, so is that,
Well, actually, yesterday was the deadline for the November meeting, and we weren't going to have a meeting, but now we
no,
are.
we are, yes, okay.
So I would just, as comments, if I can, before we adjourn, want to sort of pick up on the point, and I don't want to belabor it, sorry. But it feels like that thing that you just mentioned is something, I'm not sure how it may be able to be better communicated, but it may help with, and I just want to kind of talk about it while we can. We don't meet a lot.
Sure.
But Richard, to your point about, like, I don't know that people may realize that, like, they can engage informally to get on the agenda for the body. So it may be worth, like, the same place where we talk about, well, all the things you need to do to submit an application for approval, also sort of maybe highlight that ahead of that formal approval, there's this process for informal approval, and maybe trying to encourage people to use it more.
Okay. Well, on our application forms, we do have a section that encourages applicants, if they're uncertain about their project, that they come in to meet with staff in a pre-submittal conference.
Sure.
And we do offer that service to them, but perhaps we can modify our application form to reference that opportunity as well.
Yeah, and if and I want to also be clear, if it's not helpful to you guys, like, I don't want to just be throwing things out, because you guys are doing this work to make our jobs easier.
You know,
so.
and that's the easy thing about getting something on for informal. We don't have to write a report. We don't have to do anything. We just take whatever submittals they have and we stick it in the packet and present it to you. So
Great.
it's not a lot of work for us to accommodate that.
I have a question, sorry, I'm still thinking parking lots. Was what you were saying is, it's in our guidelines that if it's on a corner lot, it needs approval. So that's why it came to us, the Spring Hill Suites parking lot ages ago, that it needed approval.
Right.
And it was on the outskirts of town. or our district at the time, so that's why it was here. But we're getting through on a technicality, which is really hanging the rest of us up.
the
I
problem,
just want
I
to make
think
sure
you-
it was clear what I was understanding from what you had said and what,
Yeah, and I think the problem you're going to find is the terminology used in the Bricktown regs with
Is
regard to
loose.
this, and I think it might actually not be a reg but a guideline,
right?
is corner lot. The tricky part is, do we go somewhere else in the code and can we find a definition of what corner lot means? And I'm sure it probably will not include this private drive.
Yeah.
And I got that.
Now, I understand what
Yeah.
you're saying. I
But
know what you're saying.
but it's also on the corner of the viaduct, which is the border of the whole district, and essentially abuts EK Gaylord, right?
We understand what you're saying because we thought it too.
Yeah, but the guidelines don't, it
Right.
does leave it as a loophole and a
Right, right,
technicality, which
yeah.
that's where we come in as an
Right.
enforcing body of what's the real intent. And that's where I think our leverage is what's the real intent of that guideline.
All right.
All right, so the meeting is adjourned at 10:21.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Be around for parking.
I know, I tell you what.